Thank you for joining us at today's session. I am Wong from Wong and Partners, a member firm of Baker McKenzie International. And here with me in Kuala Lumpur are three esteemed panelists who will speak to us on the maturing ecosystem, the maturing FinTech ecosystem in Malaysia. I have Azleen Waris, who is the Chief Financial Officer of PNB Jewel Digital Ventures. I also have Kok Long, who is the co-founder of iPay88. And I have Yuen Siew, who is the CEO of Jirnexu. Please do join me in welcoming the panel on this virtual discussion around how FinTech services has taken a different shape as a result of COVID-19 and how Malaysia's FinTech ecosystem has taken that leap forward in the last 6 months. I actually wanted to start it off with getting thoughts from YT. YT, I met you a couple of years back, and I remember having that chat with you around your coming back, right, to Malaysia from the UK. And I wanted to ask you what your thoughts are in terms of the ecosystem that greeted you when you came back versus what you see today. Has there been a shift in the landscape? Over to you, YT.
Wow. Well, Suwan, thank you. Thanks so much for that question. So that, I remember that conversation. So yeah, I got back to Malaysia in 2010 and I founded Jirnexu in 2012. So it's been almost 8 to 10 years. So what's changed in that time? So I guess I could use like a really simple example. You know, when we first started doing business and working with banks in kind of 2012 and 2013, there were almost no innovation teams. Most banks did not have digital teams. We just worked with the business teams. And the kind of one thing I noticed that was really strange was a couple of years on, fast forward to maybe like a year or two back, 2017, 18, 19, and the world was completely different, right? Like the new FinTech startups that were entering the ecosystem in Malaysia, whether it was local or international, doesn't matter. They were engaging with innovation teams. They were engaging with digital teams. And the funny thing was, we never knew who these people were because we had spent the last kind of 5 to 6 years working with the traditional business guys. And these new FinTechs would come in and they're working with the digital teams. And it was just night and day, right? Like the world completely changed between 2012 and kind of 2016, 17, 18.
Right. And did you feel that therefore meant that it needed to be a different shift for you, right? Because you've obviously worked with the business team and the innovation team obviously puts on a slightly different hat, and they may take a different perspective, right? As opposed to the business guys who are just looking at, I just want to drive the numbers and I want to see my KPI being met. How has that changed in terms of your approach to engaging with the business?
Well, that's a good question. Actually, it's really hard because we've never really had the opportunity to deal with kind of digital or innovations teams, so we don't really know what it's like. I'd say on the positive side, right? Having started, because we started off working with business teams. As you pointed out, right, one of the challenges business teams have is, they've always got to hit their numbers, right? They've got monthly numbers, quarterly numbers. But, I think on the positive side as a business, what it did for us was that it forced us to make sure that we were always helping our clients, right? Unless we were going to help our clients hit their numbers, then they probably weren't going to be our client. So I think it's pros and cons, but I think net that was a positive for us. But one of the kind of broader benefits of the sort of the kind of the startup wave and boom we've seen over the last kind of 10 years is that banks and insurance companies are definitely became more open to innovation, right? They became much more open to changing processes, doing things slightly differently, taking a more kind of open-minded interpretation to regulation. So I think broadly it was very positive.
That's heartening to hear. I'd like to turn over to Kok Long. You've obviously, IP88 has been in the market for, a long time, right? And do you share the views, and has your experience been the same as what YT has described?
Yeah, we started way back in year 2000 as a user. We started mobile80.com, and we actually started an online store, and we really need a payment, people to pay online. Of course, during the whole infrastructure plus the
Kok Leong, you're breaking up. Do you mind coming closer to the
Okay.
speaker?
Can you hear? Okay,
Yes.
so I totally agree with YT, because we started mobile80.com way back in year 2000. The whole ecosystem, whether it's in payment or infrastructure, is still at a very early stage. So there are a lot of challenges that we have to work closely together, not just together with the regulatory as well as the infra provider, broadband company, telcos, banks, so and so forth. We also need to educate the users, right, to go digital. And educating users is very expensive and takes a lot of time for the user to really adopt digitalization. Now, one thing good about Malaysia is we have AirAsia in year 2000, 2002, because people want to fly, able to fly very affordably. And because of that, it actually forced the consumer to change their behavior, that instead of buying air ticket at a travel agent or travel office, you have to buy online. The only way to fly AirAsia is buying online. And I still remember year 2002, when Alliance Bank launched their digital payment. They only have 3 clients. One is, of course, AirAsia. Number 2 is Mobile88. And number 3 is Chari.com. And surprisingly, I would say now these 3 companies, after 20 years, we are still around. Chari.com is one of the search engine, especially Mandarin, very notable, as well as market leader in the northern region of Malaysia. Then, of course, AirAsia, still very strong in the airline business, even though COVID-19 make a lot of airlines suffering. But as I would say, of course, Mobile88 and IP. Now, because of that, it actually create a need for us to explore solutions. Solutions lead us to what we are today. IP. We are the innovator in terms of payment solution and so on. Now, if we don't have this ecosystem being built from early stage of the years, we might not able to be one of the leading countries in terms of digital transformation or digital adoption. So totally agree with YT. There are a lot of changes. In fact, the biggest change is phone is being launched into the market. Smartphone, the phone that you and I carry now, really a game changer. Because of that smartphone, a lot of things are very mobile, and people want decision quick. People want information in their fingertips, and smartphone is one of the gadgets that allow information flow seamlessly, and information are readily available in the cyberspace. Now, all this information helps. Right? So definitely agree. All right.
Thanks for that, Kok Leong. I'm going to try and take the discussion a little deeper and to try and contrast the experience. And I'm gonna pose the next question to YT, and I'm gonna ask Azleen to then contrast her experience and her views. One of the things Kok Long has rightly mentioned is education, right? When FinTech first took off in this country, obviously, you know, YT, for you, it was working with the business team. In the banks, there wasn't an innovation team. So you're looking at the business side of things. But I query whether the education also needed to happen at the regulator level. And YT, I welcome your thoughts around, you know, did you think that it's not only your customers that needed that hand-holding, that, you know, that immersion into the fact that you were offering a different solution and a different way of reaching their customers? Was there a need to educate the regulators, so to speak? And then to Azleen, right, after hearing the thoughts from YT, do you think that, you know, the pioneers, you know, in the early 2010s have paved the way for you to make it that much easier for you, right, when Raise Malaysia launched earlier this year? Over to you, YT.
So did regulators need to evolve? Well, actually, you know, when you look at, and you know this very well, right? When you look at the Malaysian regulatory space versus, let's just take Southeast Asia, right? I think let's not look at larger, more developed markets. Actually, net, you know, B&M and SC have been fairly forward-thinking, right? When you look at B&M Sandbox, we were one of the lucky entrants into that sandbox, and it's still going, right? There's still companies going in there today. I think now, especially more in the kind of insurtech space, I know there's several very exciting insurtech companies which should be coming out and launching next year. And that's all made possible because of the sandbox, right? And it's never perfect. You know, it took us quite a long time to get our approval. We did not make it into the first batch. So it's not easy, it's not perfect, it's quite tough. But it's tough for a reason, right? Because, you know, a lot of financial services are, you know, they are essentially utilities, right, to consumers. So, you know, and when you provide a utility to a consumer, right, you know, it is in the interests of the government and the regulators to make sure that the service is secure and stable, right? So it's always a difficult balancing act for a regulator, but I think net, you know, B&M and NSC have been pretty innovative.
Azleen, your thoughts?
So we are actually in the regulated space, right? Because we are offering regulated market products. So over the years, we've seen growing changes in the regulators' requirements to suit whatever current apps and security. Because at the end of the day, we are actually offering products which is actually for the market. So the market needs a product that is actually safe, and these are products which are actually relates to their long-term savings, for instance, retirement, right? So for PNB, we took a step-by-step approach in terms of offering FinTech, and we were prepared for it in the sense that back in 2018, we introduced the MySMB portal, and subsequently in 2019, we introduced the MySMB app. So the digital acceleration happened before the pandemic. We are actually lucky for that because our management has been, again, forward thinking that technology is the way to go, and actually to tap on the youth segment market, we had to start thinking about digital acceleration. So for in the space of coming from the regulator ambit, being a regulated fund manager, we are and product, it's something that we cannot compromise. And FinTech is as of now, it's a new normal, and gradually as well, there have been products along the way that we have introduced. So as it is now, our e-channels are contributing, growing from 14 back in 2018, 14% of our total AUM of ASNB funds up to now 26. And we have now Raise Malaysia, which is a micro investment app licensed by SC. It is actually, in fact, a robo-advisor underlying products of PNB with a unique value proposition of spare change management, right? So it is a product that is safe. So when it is offered to the young ones at the moment now, you see a lot of sophisticated products which are offering high return and all that, right? So we come up with a product that is always, is always about a proven and also product that is safe, which is actually underlying PNB. And Raise allows that. And Raise is a product that keeps up to the market and it targets the youth segment.
That's interesting. And obviously very heartening to hear that regulators are supportive of innovation in the financial services space. They obviously have their eye on ensuring consumers are also protected, and obviously with that, obviously the burden is also shouldered by licensed entities like yourself. So on the one hand, obviously the regulator is supportive, the regulatory regime is supportive of the growth of fintech in Malaysia. But Kok Long, you also talked about smartphones, right? Smartphones is what has propelled the growth in the last 10 years, right? If we didn't have that, then a lot of us may not be adopters of it. But what is of course interesting is that we see the growth from that because all of us have a smartphone, right? There are hardly any of us without, which is why we hear our defense minister saying "My Sejahtera, right? Forget filling in the log books when you enter a premise. But Kok Long, did you feel that COVID-19 and the movement control order actually made a drastic change such that we are beginning to see that the ecosystem and the users, really the consumers, man on the street, everyone from a young child to even my mother who's well into her 70s, having to actually embrace going digital, right? Have you seen that change? And I think, again, I will ask for a contrast, looking at what Kok Leong's experience would be. And then I will ask you, Azleen, because I know Raise Malaysia launched at the right smack during, in fact, I think it was not even CMCO, it was the tightest regime during MCO itself. So let's start with you, Kok Leong, your thoughts on the matter.
Okay, I want to add on, before I share my thoughts, I want to add on the regulators within ASEAN. Definitely agree that BNM is very far-sighted, forward-looking regulator in the bank. Similarly goes to many other central banks in ASEAN, including like here. Now, back to the education to the regulator, definitely is a must. Because a financial ecosystem is not stand by itself by one party.
Yeah.
And this financial ecosystem is actually regulated by many acts. One of the act is Financial System Act, Money Laundering Act, as well as Personal Data Protection. Now, all these three acts actually really heavily regulate these financial ecosystem. Now, because of that, a lot of services and a lot of new requirement is actually started from the consumer. Consumer actually initiated certain services that the current financial ecosystem not wide. That's the reason why the regulator needs the entire player within the ecosystem to even update the regulator. Now, what is the consumer or funds in this financial? And to be fair, regulator, being a forward-thinking regulator, they are willing to listen. That's very important. When they listen, they hear us, they hear the market, what the market wants. That's very crucial. And from there, we become the conduit between as far as the regulator. Besides consumer regulator, we also connect the banks, the insurance company, other relevant agency. Now that's very important because in order to able to provide certain financial services with a lot of approval within regulator as well as the stakeholder. So education is important. Definitely, we also learn from the regulator their view, why they are very strict on certain regulator matters, and on the other hand, they are also very open-minded, like what YT sandbox. They basically allow new technology, new firm, new startups to come. They literally welcome any solution that actually helps propel digital adoption. Back to your questions on the on your question. What is your question again? A quick one. Trigger my thoughts.
Yeah. So there's on the one hand the regulators, but there's on the other hand it's the consumers, right? It's all of us, the man on the street out there, right? Whether you know, as a result of COVID-19, right, has that acceleration to adopting FinTech and a digital solution towards using financial services, has that accelerated, and has that helped? And how, what have you seen as a result of that, and whether there is more potential for us to ensure that there is an even greater adoption of the technology?
Of course, this pandemic really accelerated the adoption. Now, when you mention about even your parents or even small kids, they have no choice but to register themselves via MySejahtera. Now, the key to adoption, technology adoption of financial services, anything to do with cyber or virtual, is more towards behavior. You imagine now, after using MySejahtera since March until now, we are talking about easily like 7 months to 7 months kind of behavior, and it become habitual to us. I'm sure now you walk into any shop, you look for the QR codes. Now this is very important. This is exactly reminded me way back in year 2002 when we launched the payment gateway together with AirAsia and Chari.com. The key is the consumer already know how to buy AirAsia ticket, and they are forced to buy because to travel at a fraction of a normal carrier price, you have no choice but to learn how to buy online. So now you have no choice but to use digital to access to premises. This is almost similar way back in year 2002. And because of that, the adoption become more and more intense, and the time frame to get the consumer to go into digital is much easier. Now, let me add on, when 5G comes in, it's totally another new user experience. We are talking about very high speed. You're talking about things that being identify just at the look at your photograph, straight away the entire system can know exactly who you are. And things are all happen in very automation. Everything is automated. It's like, wow, you know who am I, and I want to make payment or I want to subscribe any financial services. It's just as a click of a button in your phone. So it's very powerful. So you can see that more and more adoptions will be seen throughout all vertical industry, as well as to all the community across the country, as well as this region. That's for sure.
And on that, Azleen, how are you harnessing on this opportunity, right? Because if the conclusion is that all of us Malaysians are now living, breathing, and sleeping with our smartphones, right? Clearly, a launch of Raise Malaysia, a micro investing app, at the height of MCO would be, is it a boon for your team? Your thoughts?
Okay, but before I speak about Raise Malaysia, right? So essentially, during the MCO, we had the loan moratorium period, right? So typically, everybody has got some excess cash. So PNB as a whole, we saw a really steep deposits accessible through our MySMB app, our MySMB portal, right? Because they have access cash to actually now invest. As for Raise, right? Raise is a product where it requires a user to also register using a debit card of Maybank. So we have a partnership with Maybank. So it requires still a touch point when you actually when you can see the spare change investment working, right? So we were a bit apprehensive at the point in time. Okay, because now with MCO, it means that it will have less footfall, right? People will go out less, so they will spend less. But we were very surprised that throughout the 6 months of operation, so pre-launch, we had a 15,000 sign up. And as said, 30th September, actually, in fact, 2 weeks ago, we registered 100,000 signups. And I can say that all of this is due to the trust of people in PNB products, right? So in FinTech and in whatever FinTech offerings, products out there, it requires the trust from people, right? So having an institution collaboration together with a strong technology setup somehow help Raise to actually grow. So at the moment now, we are very surprised with the with the traction of take up, because the young, not just the young, everybody is now investing in Raise is also because of its proven underlying assets, which are the ASMB, products. So I can say that with the pandemic, it is also important to make sure that the offerings that is actually to the public has got to have an element of trust. It's all about security now, FinTech, right? So as for Raise, we have that, given that it is actually helped by association with a trusted brand, which is PNB.
That's very insightful. YT, I'm going to ask you a question that's somewhat linked to this point. Now, obviously, a supportive regulator with some level of, them embracing it and you walking them through your technology and your offering, that helps to get them across the line. With users, there would be those who are early adopters, because there are some who are just more tech savvy than others, and they get onto the gravy train quite quickly. Some take a little longer, like the pandemic, to get my mother used to using her smartphone and actually teaching her how to scan the QR codes. But there is also the other element that I know and I recall that you also talk about vis-a-vis the users, right? It's also financial literacy and financial education, right? Because it's growing a fintech ecosystem is not just about the regulators, it's not about the users as well, but you must also, there is also that social element on education. How does that fit in with the offerings that you have, and do you see that as being one of the pull factors that draws you know, a wider audience and a wider consumer base to your site?
Financial literacy. Yeah, that's a tough one. So yeah, I think financial literacy is one of the toughest things to deal with, right, for any fintech, along with trust, right? Trust is incredibly difficult to build for financial products digitally. But when I look at financial literacy, I guess I'll give an example. You know, if I look at the region, you know, in less developed markets, simple products like a personal loan still have to be sold, right? Or they need to be massively simplified in order to be applied for online. So, for example, like you would need to. So, if you look at a market like Indonesia, you know, personal loans were still, up until a couple of years ago, you know, distributed through agents and branches because consumers needed to be had to be explained. But fast forward, the fintech boom, what really changed was that the product was simplified, right? So they created like payday loans, they made it very easy to understand, they made them smaller. So you look like a product like Raise, right? Fantastic product, you know, spare change investing is good for everybody. And it's very simple, right? You don't need to think too much about how you save, right? Yes, it's very important that the product behind it is highly regulated and highly secure, but ultimately the process of saving is very simple. And yeah, I don't know how much technology we can really do, right? It's not something that can change overnight. You know, it can take, as you point out, right, that the pandemic has forced a lot of people to go digital. But you know, understanding financial products, you know, yes, they can start consumers can start the journey online, but from what we've seen, you know, for complex financial products, and even here in Malaysia, a lot of consumers still want some kind of human touch, right? They want to speak to somebody before they actually make that final decision on, you know, which loan to apply for or which financial product to apply for.
And I think that's an interesting point, right? Because whilst we can grow the ecosystem, we can have the players get more matured. I think ultimately it's also the product that is being offered and ensuring that, you know, when the product is being sold to the consumer, they actually know what they are getting. Now, one thing, one other player or one other stakeholder in a fintech sort of ecosystem, and it's different for the three of you, right? Azleen, you've got PNB, you've got Raise. Kok Long, you've IP88 is very well established. YT, you've got VC investors. Now, do you see for the three of you, how do you see obtaining funding to actually help with your growth, right? Clearly, some of you've got strategic investors, some of you've got financial investors. Are all of them equally aligned? Are all of them equally alive to the market that you are looking to penetrate and believe in the product? And how do you get them each across the line, right? Because you're only going to be as good as how much cash you've got in the bank. So I'll have each one of you speak to that. We'll start with you, YT.
So sorry, the question is, are Which one of the questions would you like me to answer? Many questions in there.
There are many. It's multiple folds.
Maybe I can help. Maybe I can help YT. But let me answer the question first. I think raising fund in fintech companies actually depending on the stage of the stage in. For example, IP80 is no longer startups.
Yeah.
They are in the market for the last almost 20 years, and we have backing from entity data and so on and so forth. Now, our stage now is no longer to grow the company within Malaysia. We are looking at beyond Malaysia, and as well as within Malaysia, we also want to grow horizontally the product offering. Financial services, there are many financial services, not just allow you to transact via credit card, FPX, and so on and so forth. Now, the payment methods already evolved into so many ways to make a payment. For example, you can buy something where you can pay later, right? You can buy something to getting a loan instantly during your transaction. There are companies that together with iPay, they imagine you want to buy a smartphone and you can only afford 5,000. There are a lot of companies, people who have money to loan you the balance 3,000. The only issue is how to verify and how to do application, how they are confident enough in terms of your credit standing. Time we got so many other companies that why standing credit risk valuation the ecosystem because of such ecosystems coexist with the fintech ecosystem. All this innovative product is made available, right? And we even have product like somebody buy and somebody pays. A service like pay for me. Imagine, Sven, you can buy something, your husband pay for you. Why not? Right? So your girlfriend buy something, the boyfriend pay for it. So you can see that the entire ecosystem is very different. And for us, we definitely want to raise funds to provide as many payment, innovative payment method into the market. So obviously, people like us, IPO is one of the options.
Yep.
As well as a strategic partner is another option. Means a company like startups, funds, or scale up, and so on and so forth. But to us, it's more like a strategic gap that we think that we want to fill the opportunity gap in the payment space. So our raise fund is more towards capture certain opportunity, whether it's horizontally, vertically, or even expand or grow into other countries. So different company has different needs in terms of fundraising and so forth. That's my thought.
Thanks for that, Kok Long. YT, what are your thoughts? Do you find that financial investors are actually well apprised of the fintech scene in Malaysia, and therefore, you know, they've got the confidence and part with money to invest in your dream and your idea? Is that, do you find that there is maturity there as well in this day and age?
Yeah, so I guess it should be, I'll break it down. So there's investing into fintechs, and then there's investing into startups based here in Malaysia. And those are two kind of quite different challenges. I mean, in my own experience, and this is going to be very different for everybody else, but I've always found that I need to raise from investors with experience in fintech, right? Because when you're dealing like us, when you deal a lot with financial institutions, regulators, then the kind of the barriers to entry and the areas where you build value are slightly different to, I'd say, unregulated industries. So only investors who appreciate the hurdles we've managed to kind of cross, that's where they see the value, right, in terms of what we've been able to achieve. So that's on the fintech side. The challenge being in Malaysia is the market size, right? Whenever you go and speak to a regional investor, it's very hard to raise money unless you've got a business sitting in Philippines or Indonesia, maybe now Vietnam, right? Just because the potential upside in those markets is so much greater. It does not make it impossible. It's just that the valuations and the amount you raise have to be adjusted accordingly. But having said that, I mean, I think we've proven it, and a lot of other Malaysian startups have proven it, that fintechs here in Malaysia can raise money, right? There are funds locally, there are investors regionally who understand the market well, right? Who understand the kind of pros and cons of the financial services space and the overall Malaysian market. And yeah, just I'd love to hear what Azleen will say about Raise, because here's a very successful startup from another market who came in and partnered with one of our largest GLCs, highly strategic, right? But to launch a game-changing service for the mass market. And that's not easy, right? It's not easy for a company. I'm sure it's not easy for companies like PNB to do it. So I think again, overall, Malaysia, given our restrictions and our kind of limited size, has done pretty well in terms of the ability to attract investment into the space.
Azleen, your thoughts? I know that's more a shareholder sort of question, but I think it'll be interesting to hear from you, your perspective, because obviously, as YT pointed out, right, one of your shareholders is a bricks and mortar. It has its roots as a bricks and mortar sort of institution, which partnered up with obviously a startup, a mature fintech player that eventually got listed. So your comments around whether fundraising and whether how attuned are your shareholders in terms of understanding the landscape, the market, and therefore parting with their money in terms of the venture?
So for Jewel Digital Ventures, we've got a committed fund from PNB. So to say that we're a startup, we're not really a startup, but we more or less an offshoot of a large asset management company in Malaysia, right? But our behavior, where the board wants us to do, is we're supposed to be fast, nimble, go out there, talk to the market, run permutations, develop technologies, and strike partnership with what is actually that's what would actually benefit PNB in a strategically or long-term basis, right? So hence we have Raise. Raise is actually a joint venture with an Australian partner where we created the Malaysian or the Malaysian entity for Raise Malaysia, Raise Invest Australia in Malaysia. So we did we worked hand in hand with the partner to actually create this entity from scratch. So it took us 2 years to actually get the license from right. But during that time, we were still looking up for other digital innovation. So in our space at the moment now, as we speak now as well, we are working on other partnerships as we speak, towards the KPI that was given to Jewel Digital Ventures. So for a startup like us, what the stakeholders want is actually not really on the ROI, but our ROI is intangible. For example, okay, how do I increase the number of users in coming from the e-channels? How do I increase the AUM coming from e-channels, right? So how do I improve my customer experience? So the ROI for digital and innovation from PNB is clear that at the end of the day, it's really about the whole nation. It's about wealth creation of rakyat, right? So so coming from Jewel Digital Ventures, It is also, it is, when you say about financial education and financial literacy, it's a really big undertaking, given that Malaysia has a really, it's got a long way to go, right? Hence rates. We started rates where it somehow teaches the users that, for example, if you buy a Starbucks, right, cup of Starbucks, unconsciously you know that you are actually saving, and you know that the savings in PNB products accumulates over time. So there are enhancement of features in the Raise app, where gradually we're adding tools, we're adding tracking of spending, so that the user can actually experience the growth of their investment. And the investment starts with just RM5, right? So, so PNB, very, very affordable at the smartphone, just a click away, right? In the unit trust industry, to start investing, you require a minimum probably 1,000 unit trust, right? But PNB is RM10. But we are making it, even accessible by, by allowing it, people to start investing from RM5, right? So there are other products in the pipeline that is coming up to further improve customer experience, product offering. So really watch our space. Sometime first half of the year, there will be new products and offerings to really fulfill Rakyat's long-term savings and investment growth, hopefully.
Yep. Certainly democratizing investments. We're going to I'm going to wrap up this panel discussion. I think we've talked about how the fintech ecosystem in Malaysia has evolved, right? We see that and we hear from you, right, that we are where we are because every participant in the ecosystem has contributed and in essence grown up, right? We have a regulator who is willing, we have regulators in Malaysia who are willing to listen, as Kok Long mentioned, because if they're open-minded, then obviously they will be supportive of the ecosystem, and they have been, both our financial regulators have been. They have a sandbox, they have they are open to consultations with startups even before they put in any application. So they are facilitative to try and bring to market innovative products. But you are not alone on this journey, right? You need man on the street, people like myself, to actually embrace technology and actually use it, right? And it's about the behavior of, and it takes time to change behavior. COVID and the movement control order obviously pushed a lot of users more quickly to adopt than others. But you are only as good and you can only run as far if you've got the financial backing to continue to actually release products in the market, right? And, we talked about offering more and more offerings in terms of products to consumers over time. We'll watch this space, Azleen. I hear you, first half of next year. There will be other propositions that's being offered. But it is good to hear that, the IPO is one route, clearly very hot for tech stocks right now beyond healthcare. I know IT has been a struggle because obviously, you had to be more selective in terms of who you went to, right? Because otherwise you end up having to educate your investors as well. But I'm always very heartened every time I see that you've closed a new funding round, right? Equally, the fact that GLCs in Malaysia are also actually investing in a fintech player, right? It shows that there is confidence that fintech is going to be here to stay. Now, as I wrap this up, I'm going to ask each of you to actually summarize in one sentence, right, where you think Malaysia's fintech ecosystem will be in 2025. Kok Long, at the start of this, you said I needed to control you because you have got a lot to say. So I'll start with you. One sentence only.
I think we will definitely got the opportunity to be one-stop financial hub, regional financial hub. So my one sentence is Malaysia will be one-stop financial hub. Capable of that, we have a lot of companies, startup companies, fintech companies, and one thing good about Malaysia is there are many helping hands. You got a lot of government agencies. When the government itself is helping build this ecosystem. So to summarize, is one-stop financial hub, regional or ASEAN, Malaysia, one stop.
And hopefully powered by iPay 88.
So we can't power everything. So we have to coexist with all the fintech ecosystem.
Yeah.
Payment is one of the small part of the entire ecosystem.
YT, any thoughts?
4 years, 5 years, 4 or 5 years out, I think it's going to be unrecognizable from where we are today. You know, with digital banks, e-wallets, digital insurers, digital investment firms, it's going to be a very different world. You know, I think we're just scratching the surface now, finally, right after many years. Partly because of the pandemic, partly because of just the changes in the regulation over this year, next year. I think 5 years from now, it's going to be very different.
Azleen, your thoughts?
I agree with YT. Yeah, so I agree with YT that from five years from now, we're going to be different. So even PNB, we might be in 5 years international asset management company group in Malaysia, because as of now, we've also just launched our first global fund, which is the ASN Imbang 3 Global Fund. Hopefully, it will be also offered via Race. Race is also going digital sometime next year. So for PNB, our space is always about, of course, it's always about enhancing the wealth creation of our rakyat. At the end of the day, also we want to actually allow rakyat to invest in possibly international global funds, and also as our strategic companies to also expand regionally. So for us, we do invite strategic partnerships, especially fintech partnerships to collaborate with PNB.
Right. All very inspiring thoughts. I certainly am looking forward to 2025, hearing from you what you think it will be. I wanted to thank you for your time this afternoon. It has been insightful, for sharing with us and with the audience how far Malaysia has come in terms of an adoption of fintech, and it is certainly a market to watch, and I look forward to 2025. Thank you.